Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So the webinar today is Managing Change. And these are our perspectives here at Aspirico based on 10 years of social care providing projects. So we're going to talk about projects today, managing change through projects. My name is Terry Langton. I'm a project director at Aspirico, and I've overseen a lot of projects myself. So I'm going to share some of my experiences. And with us, we also have Declan, who is the CEO and founder of Aspirico. So I've been working with Declan now, probably about 9 years. And Declan's been managing projects. He started the iplanit system, which we'll have a little look at later. It's an example of a tech project. So I'm going to hand over to Declan now, and he's going to take you through some slides. And I'll do a little demo as well of iplanit, how it fits in to this topic. So I'll pass you over to Declan. So we're going to have a little bit of slides, a little bit of the demonstration, and we reckon this should take about 40 minutes, 45 minutes tops. So I'll pass over to Declan. So Declan, it's great to have you with us. I'll leave you to it, the first couple of slides, and have a talk about the managing change.
Very good. Thanks, Terry, and good morning, everybody. And it's great to have the opportunity to speak with you today. So I'll just move ahead into the slides here. We've got about 10 years experience as an organization now working with providers across the social care sector, primarily in the disability sector, but also into aged care, vulnerable adults, some children's services work, and mental health as well. So a lot of different projects, over 100 projects implemented right across the UK, across Ireland, and increasingly doing a lot of projects in Australia and New Zealand. And those projects have also been carried out with large providers, national providers who've got multi-service offerings, right down to, and quite a few of those, right down to smaller regional providers who are very focused in their business. It's also, those projects have been carried out at different times, and in different market contexts. So by that I mean, when we launched originally back in 2010, back in the good old days, Terry and I can remember we were presenting on roadshows the iplanit vision with iplanit version 1. And a lot of that was very much before austerity kicked in. It was in a market context where funding was a little bit less tight than we could say it is now. It was in a market context where there was a lot of focus on people, on empowerment, on putting people in control, on personalization, on co-production, on giving people ownership of their budgets. And to some extent over the years, that has moved on to exercising the minds of management within providers with other topics. And a lot of that, frankly, was driven by austerity. There was a huge focus over the following years around sort of reducing costs, around streamlining efficiencies, and so on and so forth. I remember attending an event back about 6 years ago, and the headline speaker at the event, it was basically about 200-300 CEOs of service providers across the UK. And I think he scared the wits out of the audience, because he basically said in 3 years' time, half of you won't be here, and he was right. The amount of change that I have seen in those 10 years is just remarkable in terms of turnover. The sector's had to do with huge staff retention issues, but also management retention issues. There's been a lot of viability issues and so on. So a lot of external and internal drivers for change, and that, as I say, has changed over the years. I think as austerity settled in, organizations have sort of put their shoulders through the wheel and said, okay, we've got to focus on quality, we've got to focus on the voice of the customer, we've got to focus, and increasingly then as regulatory compliance drivers started to continue to increase, there was a need to to focus on that side of things as well. And that has been a major topic in more recent years, driving discussions around incident management. We're doing a huge project at the moment in the whole area of restraints. So there's lots of different drivers at different points in time. Increasingly, we're looking at the whole area of cross-agency collaboration, the whole merger of health and social care in a UK context. And then if you take over geographies, again, we've had a lot of different drivers facing the management as challenges and opportunities of providers. If you look at, for example, within the Australian or New Zealand marketplace, totally different funding context, but similar drivers in terms of focusing on clients, because ultimately that is what providers are there for. They're there to address the needs of the people that they serve as clients. They're there to help them realize their full potential, and that's always been at the essence of our founding vision. When we set the company up back in 2010, it was very much driven from personal family experience, and that was really driven down by the need to take a time and task centered approach to service delivery and monitoring, which has been sort of the cornerstone of how the sector has been managed for many years, and try to flip that slightly into more of a client-centric view. So really answering the question, so what? And instead of measuring a time and task-based approach to service management, really focusing on outcomes, focusing on plans, focusing on the client perspective. And that really drove a whole dialogue around a different data set. It drove a whole dialogue around where organizations are at now and where they want to be in the future. And a lot of that was expressed in their strategic plans. So, we've looked at hundreds of providers' strategic plans over the years, and I can honestly say, there's 90% overlap between all of them. So many times we would look at them, but they essentially come down to 5 very common themes. When you look at whether it's at an NHS level, the 5-year forward view, or whether it's just a regional provider saying, a number of years from now, we want to be the best at client focus. Well, there are, and that is a very common view. A lot of providers are really good at it. A lot of providers have built it into their culture. A lot of providers have put a huge amount of diligent time and effort into working through their current practices, whether that's sort of looking at person-centered approaches, looking at outcome frameworks, looking at the processes that they use, and then the enabling tools that they're using to allow the client to sort of have a voice and to give them control and do so in a way that's manageable, and that isn't contrary to the rest of the stakeholders' objectives in the whole mix. So, through that, and Terry will talk about this later on, we have evolved a range of capabilities, and there are technologies now out there that can support providers in terms of allowing them to focus on the client, whether they be portals and engineering those to be specifically accessible, whether that's dealing with an aged care environment, dealing with a sensory impairments of any sort, those kinds of things, and accessibility in general, whether it's using Makaton and Widget and those other sort of symbol supports. These are all things that are very specific to the sector and can make using technology not just something that is a unnecessary pain that supporters have to put up with, but something that's fun to use and something that's going to be really sticky and really sort of create a dynamic and a change and a new way of working. So that was something that we were really focused on from the outset. We've put hundreds of man-years of effort into developing and deploying iplanit now, and we've really tested it and benchmarked some of these ideas. Some of them have worked, and some of them haven't. The vast majority we have found have worked and worked very, very well. The ones that haven't have taught us as much, to be quite honest. And Terry will go through a couple of those from a project point of view at the end of our presentation. One of the things that, when we talk to stakeholders, when we talk to funders, when we talk to policymakers, when we speak at conferences and so on, you know, there's that whole sort of thing across the sector of saying, okay, that's all very well, but you know, how do we sort of embed and scale culture change and values? And yes, a lot of it is around taking time to look at your processes and making sure that they're fine-tuned. We worked with one large provider in the UK who had done a lot of work in the whole area of behavioral support, and they had codified that around a best practice methodology that they had developed with the Tizard Center, and then they chose iplanit to enable that and roll it out across 7,000 staff. So that's a lot of people to get, you know, a common way of working rolled out in a year if you haven't got systems. And that's a point we come back to later in this you know, webinar, which is the role of technology in enabling how you know, capturing that best practice, codifying it, and allowing providers to scale it at a national level. We've seen a lot of you know, ideas, really good ideas in this area. I remember back in the day in 2010, there was a whole raft of person-centered enabled sort of portal initiatives, but very few of them sort of managed to grab scale because they really needed to be engineered in a way that could be deployed across, you know, many thousands of people. And that's something we've worked very hard on, and we feel that you know, now is a good time, you know, for organizations who haven't taken a move down that road to look at it in more detail, whilst at the same time addressing the whole area of that traditional driver. A lot of the decision making that was associated with systems and processes, you know, within providers have traditionally been centered from the back office. So you would have finance and administration management very keen to get in place those back office processes, focusing on HR, capturing time and task. On the balance sheet, the bulk of the provider's cost is the people. So that has to be managed. It has to be managed efficiently. Resources have to be allocated in a way that are person-centered and drive empowerment, but at the same time, they have to be done efficiently and in a way that sort of manages the very limited costs associated with the limited resources available to the organization. What we've tried to do is build on that by saying that that's really good, and there's lots of, you know, great systems out there at the finance, HR, and to some extent at the rostering end of things to sort of address that. And we will need to bolt on to that. We need to blend into it and integrate into that client-centered technologies that really facilitate that taking it a stage further. And we have found that providers struggle to take that time and task-oriented, back-end focused technology and to re-engineer it to be client-centered, because essentially that information is a different data set. When you're building something that's client-centered, it needs to be built from the ground up with the client at the center of that data set. And that's something that we did, but we enable the integration in a way that allows people to use any of their back-end systems to be able to do that efficiently. So that then creates a complete back office to front office, point of care, right back to point of contract flow, streamlined in a way that drives down the administration costs, drives down the reporting, drives down the cost of delivery of services and so on. And we have a range of modules around that in the area of funding and so on and so forth that support that, and also linking that into clients' ability to manage their own budgets is a really key and exciting area for the sector. The next area that is a common strategic theme is the whole area of quality and compliance, and you know, that's something that's come up at various stages. You know, we're finding it's you know, depending on the region that we're working with, some of the statutory legislation is driving a closer look at this and a look at the systems and the processes associated with capturing this information. A lot of traditional approaches in this area have been very much around managing the risk from the point of view of the provider and making sure they're compliant, almost like a box ticking exercise, which is fine and it's good, but it doesn't necessarily also say define quality from a client perspective. And that's the area that we really try to focus in on. And in addition to being able to, you know, ticking all the boxes and making sure that we're not going to fall foul of a CQC or you know, a HICWA or a, you know, whomever inspection. We also want to make sure that we have the ability to be able to link, as a manager, the definition of service quality in language that is as defined by the client. So are we, making a difference? And are we tracking, if it is about sort of, capturing information around incidents or capturing information around quality of services delivered and care, then having that information available through traffic lights, in some cases before they might happen, before incidents happen, is something so that you can anticipate issues where thresholds are being exceeded, where stuff's not being escalated. Management need a dashboard in order to be able to manage quality and compliance. And a lot of providers are still using paper or Excel spreadsheets to manage this, as they are to manage some of the other drivers above. And the other final area that we found was a common theme was the theme of sort of, growing to survive. And essentially, yeah, there's a lot of providers still using very traditional paper-based approaches to capturing that data, managing that data. And as somebody once explained to me, that's when things are changing, and growing organizations are all the time changing, it's very hard. When things are changing, it's very hard to manage without a dashboard, without a line of dials in front of you. You can risk flying blind if you're not able to anticipate and see patterns within your services, particularly for larger providers. It's just an essential component, and that data does have to have that, increasingly, that point of care oriented aspect to it, as opposed to just necessarily tracking the cost side of the organization. So if we're driving all these 5 themes through our strategic plans, that's a heck of a lot of change in an organization. And if we're doing it in a context of the kind of changing world that we had in our first slide, where we've all these external and internal drivers, from changing management and everything else, you need a solid cornerstone in the form of a set of processes that are automated, that will be a buffer for your organization to allow you to grow and to evolve and to change and adapt your business irrespective of the environment. And we use the analogy of flying a Boeing 747 through a storm. You'd never do it with a blindfold on. You absolutely need to have immediate line of sight of that information in order to be able to make decisions in a timely way, so that you can anticipate issues and so on and so forth. And increasingly, we're seeing that best practice providers are doing that, and we're seeing some fantastic ability to be able to take reports around how well they're delivering services, reports that evidence the value of the services, for example, by saying, yeah, here's all the outcomes that we've achieved in the area of independent living. Here's how many outcomes that we've achieved in this region for this cohort of services, and here's how many have not been achieved, and here's the reasons why not. And here's a graph that compares that to the previous year, and you can share that with funders. You can put it into tenders as you're bidding for new business. It really does begin to quantify the value add that providers of really good services are adding, and that in itself is a powerful set of tools to help manage stakeholders, whether they're funders, whether they're inspectors, whether they're trustees, and so on and so forth. So that's, I guess, behind some of the thinking that we're putting forward in this particular webinar today.